Hi, welcome to my channel, Reader Woman. My name's Judy, and let's talk books. In particular, Alias Grace by the Canadian author Margaret Atwood. It was originally published in 1996 and to some real critical acclaim at the time. It won the Canadian Giller Prize and was also shortlisted for the Booker Prize in 1996. So that was pretty cool. I found that out. Margaret Atwood is a Canadian author, poet, activist. She's done it all. And she's primarily known, though, for The Handmaid's Tale. Alias Grace starts with a murder. Let me put it this way, it's based on a true story. In 1843, a landowner, Thomas Kinnear, and his housekeeper, Nancy Montgomery, were murdered by two servants, Grace Marks and, let's see here, what was his name? James McDermott. James McDermott hung for the murder. They were only tried for the murder of Kinnear. They never got around to the trial for the murder of the housekeeper. Because Grace Marks was only 16, she was young, pretty, her sentence was commuted from hanging to life in prison. So 1843, she's incarcerated. And the story takes up 15, 16 years later, and there are a group of local people. The penitentiary is outside of Toronto, and a group of people feel that she has been incarcerated long enough, and they hire a doctor to come and interview her, see if she's sane, see if it's possible that she should be, some clemency shown, and she should be released. So Dr. Simon Jordan goes to the penitentiary in Kingston, Ontario, I think, yeah, Ontario, and he has a series of interviews with Grace Marks. Come to find out, she hasn't been entirely for the 15 years at the penitentiary. For about a year and a half, she was in an insane asylum where it sounded like some pretty nasty stuff happened. The book, it starts off with her talking in her head, seeing things, and you're kind of left throughout unsettled. You don't know if she's insane. You don't know if she's totally cunning, if she was a dupe. You just have no sense of who she is. And yet it's her voice primarily throughout the novel. Her telling this Dr. Simon Jordan her life over a series of interviews. Because she is docile, she is, she still is a very good-looking woman, and she is great with a needle. She knows how to sew beautifully in a way that most people of the time wouldn't be able to. So her skill level was very, very high, and she was prized for those things. And so instead of having to spend all of her time at the penitentiary, she worked at the governor's house, which the governor was overseeing the penitentiary, or that kind of thing. So she would be escorted by two guards who were very coarse and rude and suggestive to her from the penitentiary to this residence and then once her work was done, they would escort her back. While she was in the home, she was fed much better than she would have been in the penitentiary. She had not a great deal of freedom, but she did have some. She was able to work at the laundry with one woman, and she just had better food and better conditions for part of the time. I found myself having to take breaks from reading this book. I was enjoying it, no doubt about it. However, as I discovered, Margaret Atwood, I wrote this down, Margaret Atwood likes to look under rocks and see what is crawling underneath. So the whole novel, you're in this quandary. Do you believe her? Do you not? The words that she says throughout are, on the one hand, it really is like the Arabian Nights stories of Scheherazade, who comes and tells a tale every night, warding off her death. And Grace is very much in that type of theme of, the longer she has to talk to this doctor who is somewhat good looking, who's interested in her. And even though they may not have had any, true contact, they spent a lot of time together. To the point, it was natural, I thought, that both of them would have sexual dreams about the other. I think that would just be par for the course. Reading the book, I really enjoyed the story. I thought that there were some really great quotes. In fact, I wrote down some of them. When Grace Marks meets Dr. Simon Jordan the first time, it's at the penitentiary. She had gotten frightened at the governor's house with a doctor coming to measure her head. And she saw knives inside his doctor's case, and she screamed and fainted. So she was put into solitary confinement back at the penitentiary. And at the end of that, this Dr. Simon Jordan shows up. And so this is her thoughts at that time. He must mean that he has come to test me, although he's too late for that, as God has done a great deal of testing of me already. And you would think he would be tired of it by now. There is a salt of the earth. Perhaps I should go back. A couple of things. This is not spoiler free. I have no sense of boundaries when it comes to talking about a book. So don't, if you want to save the story for yourself, you probably should not be watching this. If you're interested in hearing about it, you perhaps have read it or you might be thinking about it, but you don't mind knowing part of the story, this is for you. So, going back. There were just some really nice quotes, some odd look at people's lives. Grace Marks came from a very poor family in Ireland who immigrated to Canada. Basically, her mother's sister had helped the family survive because her father was an abusive alcoholic, and so the aunt was basically trying to support this family and help her sister make some money with doing embroidery and needlework. The aunt's husband, when she becomes pregnant, decides it's time to send this family off. They need to concentrate on their own family. And so he comes up with a funds that gets them to Canada, to Toronto. It's never said how many siblings she has. They're Protestant family in Ireland. But, you know, there had to have been. Oh, wait a minute. It did say. I'm sorry. It did say. I have forgotten. 12, 14, some dead, some living. The oldest one's off trying to make a living for themselves, with the understanding they're supposed to send money home. So as Grace and her family are hitting the Canadian shore, Grace is about 12. Her mother dies on the voyage over, and she's in charge of her younger siblings. Their father, just in a new land, it's still the same old story, except now Grace is in the place of the mom, and he's very abusive towards her. Any money there is, he's drinking it. He finds some kind of housing for them, and basically the landlady is like, you guys cannot stay here any longer. And he decides that Grace, at nearly 13, is old enough to go out and make her own living, and of course send that money home to him so that he has money to drink on. She goes to a home, an alderman's home, a very wealthy family in Toronto. There are a lot of servants. There's 4 maids like herself, and when she arrives, she's taken under the wing of Mary Whitney, who becomes her best friend, her tutor of life. You know, Mary is a little coarse. She calls a spade, and she has big plans for herself, and she helps Grace to realize that she needs to look out for herself as well, that she has to put her dreams first, that it's not right that she should give all of her money to her father, and so she doesn't. So at the age of 13, she's a maid, one of 4 maids. There's a whole staff in the house. She learns basically the trade of being a maid. And you know, Mary Whitney is, I don't think it's necessarily love, but maybe it's a mother figure for her. I'm not quite sure, but it's more than just a friend. And unfortunately, Mary Whitney dies. She got involved with a man and got pregnant, tried to have an abortion, and died from the repercussions of that abortion. From that point on, Grace kind of loses her footing. And of course, the question is, what happened? You know, there's the thought that at that time she's possessed by Mary's spirit because she didn't open the window and let her soul fly free. I don't know. And so she goes along a few years, you know, because I think probably by the time she is 14, she's no longer working for the aldermans. She's finding various places to work, but hasn't really found the perfect fit for her. And so she ends up taking a job out in the countryside with the housekeeper for Thomas Kinnear. She meets Nancy Montgomery at her last place of work, last home that she was working in. And she agrees to go out to this country home and be the maid. She had high hopes. She liked Nancy. Once again, are we talking a mother figure? What are we really, you know, wanting a best friend? She said that Nancy reminded her of Mary. So somehow there's something going on in Grace's mind, and her hopes are kind of immediately dashed. Come to find out, Nancy Montgomery was the mistress of Thomas Kinnear, and so she's living in a household that is very irregular, not proper. We're talking, you know, the 1840s, the height of Victorian morals, and even though we are in the outskirts of civilization, you're still expected to keep up appearances. And from there, somehow, we know that James McDermott took Nancy and threw her down the cellar stairs. He says that Grace helped him strangle her, and then he cut her up into 4 pieces and hid her under some kind of tub. And this was done while Thomas Kinnear was gone. When Mr. Kinnear comes back, McDermott shoots him and throws him down the cellar, and he and Grace grab all the wealth, you know, the gold pieces, money, anything that they could possibly sell. They take the horse, the wagon, and they head to the United States. They are found shortly thereafter, the next day or two, and brought back for trial. And that's how that part of the story goes. And in fact, let me read this quote here. This is from Grace. She's ruminating on her life story. When you are in the middle of a story, it isn't a story at all, but only a confusion, a dark, shattered glass and splintered wood, like a house in a whirlwind, or else a boat crushed by the icebergs or swept over the rapids, and all aboard powerless to stop it. It's only afterwards that it becomes anything like a story at all, when you are telling it to yourself or to someone else. I thought that was quite interesting. And, you know, she's had 15, 16 years to tell this story to herself. And she has it pretty well honed. You're just never quite sure what's going to happen. And ultimately, not to ruin everything, but ultimately you're left with the question of, was she innocent? Was she not? So many stories at the time have her being a very active member of this murder. That not only an active member, but perhaps the instigator of it. Towards the end of the book, there was this one very, very powerful quote. And this is Grace Marks at the end. And she starts off, "The truth is that very few understand the truth about forgiveness. It is not the culprits who need to be forgiven. Rather, it is the victims, because they are the ones who cause all the trouble. If they were only less weak and careless and more foresightful, and if they would keep from blundering into difficulties, think of all the sorrow in the world that would be spared. I had a rage in my heart for many years against Mary Whitney, and especially against Nancy Montgomery, against the two of them both for letting themselves be done to death in the way that they did, and for leaving me behind with the full weight of it." I thought that was chilling. And I came away from the book thinking, yes, she was involved. So then we come to Alias Grace, that was made in 2017 under Netflix with, it's a Canadian production, I believe, 6-part series. And I decided to watch that shortly after finishing the book. It was starring Sarah Gadon as Grace, and she really was good. Edward Holcroft as Dr. Simon Jordan. I hadn't really seen him before. He was very handsome. Directed by Mary Herron. Written and produced, or co-produced, by Sarah Polley. I love Sarah Polley. She wrote the screenplay. And in fact, when I was looking it up in 2012, she got permission from Margaret Atwood to write the screenplay. I was disappointed she didn't actually direct it. But if you don't know Sarah Polley, she's a Canadian actress, writer, director, producer, and activist. I noticed her as a child. She was a very young, and in fact I found out up in Canada she was Ramona in the Beverly Cleary series Ramona. I saw her in the movie Baron von Munchausen and was captivated, and somehow, I don't know how, her face just stuck with me. She was also in a Lucy Maud Montgomery adaptation of Avonlea. I did not see it, but she, for many years, was starring in that. The next time I really remember her is in the movie Go. And she was brilliant. It was a great ensemble cast, great movie. Also, in 2012, here in Bellingham we have what's called Doctober for October, and at our independent film theater, they show a variety of documentaries, and Sarah Polley wrote and directed this particular documentary about her life, actually, Stories We Tell, and it was very moving. It was very good. It was about her finding out that she'd been teased as a kid by her siblings, that she just didn't look like the rest of them. And come to find out, there was a reason. She was, her mother had an affair with another man. And the man who raised her was not her biological father. But as we all know, it's who raises you gets the credit for being your real father. So anyways, a fascinating look at, yes, a family with this huge story, but also the stories we do tell each other as families and how they're passed down and passed on. Anyways, she is such a talented person. She's written and directed 2, I would say, fairly big movies as well. Yeah, keep her name in mind if you're ever interested in her career. So anyway, she wrote it and then helped to produce it along with the director and also Margaret Atwood. I found that interesting. I thought there was one big mistake, and it was at the very beginning. Because at the beginning of the book, Grace Marks is very clear that she has several personas. And one of the personas that she has is to appear stupid, so that people leave her alone. The series went directly into a very intelligent woman who seemed to be talking all the time. And I thought that was perhaps, that wasn't the best first step. You know, that was one quibble I had. I thought that the TV show actually perhaps because it's more visual, gave me that chill. I had certain areas in the book that I just had to stop. It was getting too creeped out. You know, because there's this question, is it mental illness? You know, is she schizophrenic? Which if you think she was 16, it very well could be, you know, the beginnings of schizophrenia. The fact that she was raised in extreme poverty. That's just, you know, that is a stress you just don't get over. And you take it with you into the future. So yeah, there were a lot of things that perhaps a little bit more powerful simply because of the truth of film. And yeah, I was questioning it a little bit more than I was in the book. In the book, I was more reading it as she might very well be innocent of the murders. Or an innocent pawn. The fact that she may have said certain things, they were just taken wrong. Not taken in the way she meant them to be. Maybe. So, you know, I highly recommend both of them. I think that they are, you know, you can take one or the other, you can take them both. But I will leave you with one last quote. She's talking about, finally, she's been making quilts her entire life. 11. She's 40 something when she's released from prison. She's been making quilts for everyone as a servant, but never herself. And finally, she has a home of her own. She is making her own quilt for her own bed. So she says, but 3 of the triangles in my Tree of Paradise quilt will be different. One will be white from the petticoat I still have that was Mary Whitney's. One will be faded yellowish from the prison nightdress I begged as a keepsake when I left there. And the third will be a pale cotton, a pink and white floral, cut from the dress of Nancy's that she had on the first day that I was at Mr. Kinnear's, and that I wore on the ferry to Lewiston when I was running away. I will embroider around each one of them with red feather stitching to blend them in as a part of the pattern. And so we will all be together. When she stated that in the TV series, I got chills. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this, and give it a thumbs up if you did. Who knows how long, if anyone wants to listen to something this long, but I had a lot to say. And I will be back soon, and we'll talk about another book. Take care. Bye.